We have an image of Jesus. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, all-inclusive, warm and fuzzy. But the real Jesus, he wasn't merely meek. He was also a radical reformer. He challenged the establishment. He flipped tables. He tore down tradition and called people back to the truth of Scripture. And that's the spirit that's driven every great movement of God ever since. From the Protestant reformers who risked everything for the gospel, to the heroes of faith who stand against the tide today. True Christianity has always been a call to reformation. Today, our world is in chaos. Our traditions are crumbling. Maybe it's time for another reformation. Not a gentle change, but a radical rebirth of faith. A final, bold call to return to the everlasting gospel. Join us for Reformation Reborn, a new series where we rediscover the radical reforming Jesus and what it means to be part of his church today. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But in the Dark Ages, a time when tradition and superstition prevailed, and most people couldn't read, a picture was worth 1,000,000. Stained glass windows of saints, elaborate tapestries, statues, and icons, all of it was designed by the medieval church to shape the beliefs of the common people. But now imagine a simple woodcut engraving, a simple woodcut sign held up by a traveling Lollard or Waldensian on the side of the road. And in this woodcut, on the one side was the Roman pontiff, robed in splendor, with kings and courtiers bending the knee before him to kiss his feet. And on the other side, an image of Jesus, humbly dressed, on his knees, washing his disciples' dirty feet. No contrast could make a more profound impression. Jesus was a dramatically countercultural reformer. He proposed a new kind of kingdom, not a pyramid of power where the great sit on top, but an inverted one where the greatest are at the very bottom, serving everyone else. The way of the world is marked by power and wealth and prestige. Throughout every era of human history, it has been marked by great leaders, men like Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan, Charlemagne or Napoleon. And these individuals, they walk just a bit larger than life. Their greatness demands that other people serve them. They have private jets and exclusive entrances. They have security details and personal assistants. In ancient times, they had servants. Today, they have entourages, chauffeurs, and access to places no one else can go. The way of the world is built on a simple premise. Climb the ladder. We're taught that the purpose of life is to gain influence, to amass wealth, to earn the right to be served. Our culture is obsessed with followers and likes and being at the top of the food chain. We measure greatness by how many people we have beneath us. The world's kingdom is a pyramid with the powerful at the very top. The greatest in the world sit on thrones. They wear elaborate crowns and demand that people bow to them. But Jesus, the King of Kings, proposed a radically different picture of greatness. He did not sit on a throne, but when he came to earth, he knelt on the floor. And he taught his disciples, saying, "The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and as he who governs, as he who serves. For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as the one who serves. The word benefactor might literally be translated as a good doer. The wealthy and powerful were seen as good doers when they contributed to causes. They used their money and power to create a public image of themselves that would reinforce their status and keep them at the top of the social hierarchy. Just like today, when the wealthy and powerful put their names on buildings and support political candidates and create private foundations, all for the sake of building a public image to reinforce their status. And even today, Jesus' question should challenge our way of thinking. He asks, who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Don't we have the perception even today that the important person, the busy person, the one who comes in and sits down and then everything begins, the one who sits at the head of the table, don't we have the understanding that they are the important person? But Jesus rejects this conclusion, which seems so natural to us. He says, I am among you as the one who serves. Whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Yes, Jesus was promoting a kingdom drastically different from any organization in this world. Too often in our church, the church purchased by the very blood of Christ, our thoughts seem identical to the Gentiles. We judge and value success of our churches by how large their crowds are, by how big their buildings are, by how distinguished their pastor is, by how much tithe they generate. We heap up praise and prestige on people from wealthy families who give more. Our schools are consumed by enrollment numbers, our hospitals controlled by the bottom line. But we seem oblivious and at other times downright antagonistic to what true greatness is all about. We still think in terms of the world's pyramid, and we forget that Jesus called us to live by an inverted one. Jesus' example rebukes us all. He, the greatest of all time, humbled himself to the very lowest. He did not come to be served, but to serve. Jesus knelt down and he began to wash his disciples' feet. And it's in this moment that the Lord's teaching is met with a living demonstration of the greatest obstacle. For when Jesus came to wash Simon Peter's feet, Peter objected and said, Lord, are you washing my feet? And Jesus said, what I'm doing to you, you don't understand now, but after this you will. Peter, still resisting, said, you shall never wash my feet. But then Jesus said, if I don't wash you, you have no part with me. And Peter, in his misguided zeal, immediately shifted from one extreme to the other, now demanding that the Lord not wash only his feet, but also his hands and his head. Oh, how often we get it wrong. Either we're too proud to accept God's humble service to us, or we are so proud that we try to command it on our own terms. In both cases, our preference for pride and position refuses to accept that humility is true greatness. As Peter struggled, Jesus warned, Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. Simon Peter was so sure of his devotion to Jesus. He was so sure he was a committed disciple who would never betray his Lord. He'd walked on water. He'd been with Jesus at the Transfiguration. He'd been with him in Gethsemane, or not yet, but he would. Jesus saw that the central issue in Peter's heart, however, was a lack of humility. Jesus had taught his disciples that the good shepherd is the one who gives his life for the sheep. But Jesus knew that despite all of Peter's accomplishments and devotion and commitment, Peter wasn't yet ready to lay his life down for the sheep. Jesus knew that Peter would betray him, and that only through true humility could he be restored. After the resurrection, Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" And he commanded him, If you do, feed my flock, tend to my sheep, do the work of a good shepherd. And Peter, no longer so sure of himself, hesitates, saying, Lord, you know that I love you. Using the Greek phileo, the weaker form. I love you with this weak human love that I have. What I have isn't even good enough. Yet Jesus urges the Greek stronger word, do you agape me? Do you love me? If you love me, then feed my sheep. 3 times Jesus asked Peter, and each time Peter struggles. Gone is the self-confident disciple, so overeager and overzealous at the foot washing. Peter loves Jesus, but after the cross, Peter now realizes that being the good shepherd, being the good pastor is another word for shepherd, doesn't make Peter any better than the sheep. It doesn't entitle him to any more attaboys than the sheep. It earns him no power or privilege or esteem. It only offers him the opportunity to lay down his life for the sheep, which is what Jesus says to him the last time. He says, feed my sheep. Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. Here Jesus predicts Peter will be crucified. And yet tradition tells us that when it came time for the apostle to be crucified, he could not comprehend being killed by the same manner of his Lord, and so he asked to be crucified upside down, because he'd come to understand that humility is true greatness, because he saw himself unworthy to suffer the same death as Jesus. Peter had learned his lesson and demonstrated it with a final profound act of humility. Today, we are also in a room full of committed Christ followers. But what if Jesus called us not to a life of privilege and success, but a life of hardship and suffering? Would we still follow him then? The Gospels tell us to expect hardship, not a happily ever after. Even this week, we've seen a public example of this. A prominent figure, among other reasons for his seventh-day Sabbath keeping, Charlie Kirk, faced immense opposition and ultimately lost his life, in part for standing for his convictions. I'm sure he never set out to share his beliefs saying, I hope I die for them. But this is what we mean when we say that following Christ calls us to a life of hardship. Sometimes this life of hardship isn't about a public stand or a bold profession of faith. Sometimes it's a quiet, crushing pain that comes out of nowhere. This week, I bumped into a pastor friend of mine. He's lived his whole life trying to serve the Lord. Now he works as a hospital chaplain. A few weeks ago, he and his wife went on a road trip for his birthday. On the way home, they were hit by an uninsured driver. His wife of 40-plus years was in the passenger side of the vehicle, and she died. Now my friend faces the crushing reality of his grief with no financial recourse, and he turns to me and he says, I can't keep working as a hospital chaplain. It's just too painful. I'm the one who needs help now. What do you do when your whole life is caving in? How do you find strength to go on? You didn't expect the Christian life to give you this. Perhaps there's someone here whose life didn't turn out the way you hoped it would. Perhaps you lost a job. Perhaps your late night with crying babies has you feeling isolated. Maybe you've received a debilitating health diagnosis. Maybe you lost a friend. Perhaps, like Peter, you've been a committed disciple. But also, like Peter, you still hoped that living for God would get you something from God. If Jesus were here this morning, I believe he would kneel down and wash your feet. For this is what Jesus was trying to teach us when he bent over and he washed his disciples' feet and he said, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. We wash each other's feet to follow Jesus' example, to exemplify a commitment that we are called to bear in our hearts and demonstrate in our lives. That if our Savior and Lord, if the King of Heaven could humble himself to death, even to the death of the cross, then there is no act of service, no hardship or suffering too big for us. There's no sacrifice too humbling for me to make, no persecution or attack too painful for me to endure, whether I understand why Jesus is allowing me to suffer that way or not. I can endure excruciating pain because I am not living in this life to be served, but to serve. I wash feet to symbolize my commitment to be humble, to serve even when it's uncomfortable, and to seek the good of others without expecting anything in return. I wash feet because Jesus paid it all, and all to him I owe.